Nō mai, haere mai, welcome. I'm Bruce Munro, and with me is International Relations Specialist, Professor Robert Patman. And this is Global Insight. Two very localised events have been taking place in the Middle East this month. Both have significant global impacts. Let's take a look. Welcome, Robert.
Good day, Bruce.
Firstly, in the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, the level of fighting has intensified to the point where the United States President Joe Biden has said that the indiscriminate bombing of civilians risks Israel losing international support. My question to you is, does Israel care?
I think Mr. Netanyahu, who has a political interest in keeping the war going, because he's very worried that once the conflict stops, a lot of people will be asking tough questions about how he presided over the surprise attack of the 7th of October. I think Mr. Netanyahu will continue to say that he will carry on regardless. But this is tough language coming out of Washington, but we've got to get this in perspective. America has been warning Israel on a number of issues. Past presidents have warned Israel about illegal settlements, but they've continued to conduct those legal settlements, and America has continued to provide something like $3.8 billion up front, beginning of each financial year, to Israel. So I think Mr. Netanyahu, his defiance is based both on his political needs. He wants to present himself as someone who's not going to compromise on Israel's security for domestic political reasons, but also on the calculation that he knows the Republican Party is even more pro-Israel than the Democrats. So he believes that the Democrats are not going to get too tough with him. They may use some tough warnings, but he doesn't think it's going to endanger. I don't know whether it's true or not, but I think that's his perception, that he can ride this out.
So do you think he is going to lose international support then? You're saying the US is going to stick with him, basically, no matter how much they warn him. What's going to happen?
What's happening at the moment is the United States is now trying to set a timeline. They want to stay by Israel, or the Biden administration does. But of course, the Biden administration is getting very, very nervous about the loss of domestic support in the United States, particularly amongst young people. People who are, the United States has quite a large Muslim population, and they've begun an abandon Biden movement because they are furious about what they see as Biden's one-sided approach to this problem. So Biden has said to Mr. Netanyahu in the last couple of days, in fact, Jake Sullivan is in the Middle East now, is in Israel now, his national security advisor, delivering the message that America wants this whole military phase of the campaign to be over by the end of the year. And Mr. Netanyahu is pushing back on that. He's saying no, it will take months. And they're also disagreeing on what follows after the military campaign. One of the most striking things was in the middle of the week, Mr. Biden not only told Mr. Netanyahu he had to change his policy, but he also said you cannot, Mr. Netanyahu's regime or government cannot say no to the prospect of a Palestinian state. Well, Mr. Netanyahu spent the last 30 years saying no. So that there is a potential confrontation there. But, up to now, we've seen little evidence that America is prepared to push its disagreement with Israel to the point where it will peel away from Israel. It hasn't happened yet.
So how should the international community then be managing this situation?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, for the last the last 9 weeks, the world has largely watched as, first of all, an appalling, horrendous Hamas attack on Israel, killing 1,100 people, triggered a massive and disproportionate response from Israel, which we now know it consisted of an aerial bombardment and a ground offensive. That has killed more than 18,000 Palestinians. According to the UN, of those 18,000 Palestinian civilians, 70% of them are women and children. 55% of buildings in Gaza have been destroyed, according to satellite imagery. A policy of scorched earth has been effectively followed. and something like 80% of Palestinians have been displaced from their homes. So this is a humanitarian catastrophe. How do you manage that situation? Well, as in Ukraine, the UN Security Council has been found wanting. So there's not going to be any quick fix for this. I think in the short term, the best way we could manage this crisis is for the United States to remind Israel that they're now acting, or they've tested the boundaries of humanitarian law. They need to respect humanitarian law, and that until Israel gives an undertaking it will do that, America will be suspending military aid to it. That would send a very clear message. But whether Mr. Biden would do that with the election year looming in the United States, I very much doubt. In the longer term, the crucial better way of managing such a crisis as the Gaza crisis is for the UN Security Council not to be encumbered by the veto. Because it's clear that the overwhelming majority of countries in the world wanted at a very early stage, within the first week, to bring this conflict to a halt. If that conflict had been halted in the first week, lots of innocent civilians in the Gaza Strip would not have lost their lives. So what we're seeing here is a clear connection between the dysfunctionality of the UN Security Council and the tragedy and the scale of the tragedy that's unfolding. Your question is a really good one. There's no quick fix as far as I can see, but countries like New Zealand do have to speak up.
Also in the Middle East, in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, this month we've had more than 200 countries that are gathered for the COP28 climate summit. And there they've signed this historic agreement for the global reduction of fossil fuels to begin. What does COP28 tell us about the state of geopolitics and its role in climate change control?
I think it would depend where you're located. If you're a Pacific Islander, you'll be extremely disappointed by what they see as very modest achievements. I think in the developed world, in Europe and the United States, and possibly in New Zealand and Australia, they may argue that the glass was half full rather than half empty, precisely because an important threshold has been crossed, which is at an international gathering of 200 countries present, they have agreed that reliance on fossil fuels must be steadily decreased, albeit in a just and fair manner. That wording, of course, means that it's not going to happen overnight, because many oil producers are lobbying furiously at events like this to prevent any steep measures or radical measures. But I think, in a sense, there is probably still a mismatch between the modest measures being taken at COP28 and the problem of climate change, which threatens to overwhelm us in the not too distant future.
The New Zealand government has recently made a decision to allow more exploration and mining, drilling for fossil fuels. Was that decision noticed at this forum, or is our country just too small to warrant attention?
No, it was very much noticed, and we should get away from this idea that we're too small to be noticed. In an interconnected world, everything that goes on in New Zealand is noticed, good and bad. And if the government felt that it could smuggle this measure through without any pushback, I think it's got another thing coming. And the interesting thing is that Simon Watts had quite an uncomfortable time at COP28, with parties and various countries saying, is New Zealand moving backwards on its international commitments? He assured them that they were not. But the most hard-hitting criticism have come from Vanuatu, Fiji, Tonga. Remember, these Pacific Island states, for them, the #1 national security issue is climate change. It's not US-China rivalry, it's climate change. That's their #1 national security issue. From their point of view, they see New Zealand's decision to remove the ban on oil and gas exploration as an unfriendly act by a country they've got regarded as a close neighbour. They believe that New Zealand's putting its own selfish interests above theirs. They also believe it's not consistent with what they felt was good neighbourly relations. So I think the government's going to be surprised how much resistance they get to this. I think they still thought, the new government and its partners, that they could bring in a measure and no one else would notice it. But it is being noticed. And this is because this issue of gas and oil exploration and its implications for climate change is what we call an intermestic issue. It's neither international or domestic, it's intermestic. And so, in a sense, this is going to surprise the government because they thought, oh, this is an internal issue. We can do this. After all, we've got a mandate to do it. We won the election on this basis and we confirm we're going to do it. So far, so good. But now they're going to encounter pushback because many other countries say, no, no, this is not just your business. What you do, if you remove the ban on oil and gas exploration, it has big, this is the Pacific Island countries talking, has big implications for our viability of states. So it's going to be an interesting one to watch.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you for watching. Catch us next time on Global Insight. Ka kite anō.